Welcome to the Urban Wall Street Project. I'm your host, Earl Christian III, of course, and today I have an amazing show. We're going to talk about a remarkable human being. I have a very established gentleman in the building who's an urban historian. I'm talking about Mr. Pierre Toussaint, a saint from Tribeca. My studio guest is Mr. James Sullivan. And without further ado, I want to introduce him now. Sir, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Earl.
Thank you, thank you. So Pierre Toussaint, one, I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk about this remarkable human being as I'm learning of his legacy, if you will. So I want you to kind of, just get right into it and talk about it. And I know he lived from the late 1700s to the early 1800s, and during the time that he lived, or the mid, because he was about 72 when he passed away, correct?
Right.
So I know he lived a remarkable life, but I want to talk about some of the stages from slave to free man to just the point that he is now.
Right. A variegated career he had. Started out as a slave born in Saint-Domingue in 1781. And Saint-Domingue, of course, would go through a revolution which would occasion Pierre Toussaint to leave and come to the United States. But at the time that revolution occurred, 1791, Toussaint is a young man, teenager. And we don't know a great deal about the events of the revolution and how they impacted him. We know that he lived through the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1797, his departure for New York. Coming to New York, he was immediately apprenticed as a hairdresser. Hairdressing has been a lively form of black entrepreneurship over the years. And Toussaint became a distinguished hairdresser. In the words of Burroughs and Wallace in their big book, Gotham, he was the most distinguished and celebrated hairdresser. Douglas Bristol, an historian from University of Southern Mississippi, calls him the Vidal Sassoon of old New York.
Okay. Now, I know something interesting, as you know, I try to do my history and my own personal research, and I know that he was a slave, and I remember seeing one of your tours. He was a slave, and then he gained his freedom here in New York, correct?
Right.
But did he not kind of stay as a slave to a certain degree?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about that, because we know generally in history when African Americans or a black person gained their slavery, the last thing they wanted to do was kind of remain to whoever owned them, quote unquote. But let's talk about why he felt the need to maintain that status.
Yes. That's a very unique ingredient in his life, and it's something that definitely needs to be explained as best we can understand it.
Yes, sir.
From 1797, as a 16-year-old, to 1807, 10 years, he remained a slave. Certainly from 1800 to 1807, he was a well-to-do slave, and easily could have purchased his own freedom, which was the way it was done. You could buy your way out. He never bought his own freedom, but he bought the freedom of other slaves. So while he's buying the freedom of other slaves, he remains a slave to his mistress, Marie Berard. He says at one point when someone says, "Why are you doing this? You could easily buy your own freedom." He says, "My freedom belongs to my mistress." So he is a man who's living out what you might call the old regime, the life of a slave. Right. Does he feel that slavery is a good thing? I don't think so. I mean, he's actively working to help other people gain their freedom. Yet he seems to have also a spiritual desire to always put the other person first. Very, very much at the end of his life, a letter comes to him from a woman who was the daughter of someone that he did the hair of, that he knew well. And she says, "Toussaint, you want nothing for yourself." She says it's a rare person that could live a life where they want for others, to do for others, but seem not to be concerned about themselves that much. I want to be that way. I want to be comme chrétien. I want to be a Christian like you are a Christian.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so, but in 1807, Marie Berard is dying, and she writes the manumission. So he's been in New York for 10 years. Some people think that he remained a slave for his whole life. No, he was 26,
okay.
26 years old, and he's now free.
Okay, so now he's gained his freedom, gained his freedom or decided, I'm going to be free the way the average free man feels he should be outside of slavery.
Right.
But I know once he came to New York, now he's considered now the saint of Tribeca, but there's been a road to that point. We talked about a couple of miracles, so let's share with that kind of that road to becoming a sainthood, or let's address these two miracles as
Okay.
you said early on.
Okay. The first stage that the church went through was in looking at his life. The first stage is, did he live a life of what is called heroic virtue? In other words, is he really kind of a man for other people? And a panel was convened, the cardinals and bishops. They looked at his life and in the actual primary source material that we have. And that was the decision was definitely there was something extraordinary about him. So he was declared venerable. And John Paul II, in 1995, on a visit to Haiti, declared him venerable. Now he needs two miracles to be canonized. The first miracle, though, he will become blessed, Pierre Toussaint. And then when they get a second miracle, he will be canonized. A boy in Silver Spring, Maryland, in the year 2000, underwent a miraculous remission from curvature of the spine. His parents, the year before, had heard about Toussaint in an article in the Washington Post. They began to pray to Pierre to help their son. And 5 months after they began these prayers, the boy went through a spontaneous and remarkable remission. Instantaneous remission. The doctor was questioned, Vietnamese physician in Washington. She says, there's no way to explain this in any scientific sense. No young person would be relieved of curvature of the spine instantaneously. So that's a significant event.
That's an amazing event.
In order for it to be a miracle, it has to, the remission has to be permanent. So he's now 15 years old, and they want him to pass through adolescence so that he would come out on the other side completely healed, and there would be more reason to feel that it was a miracle, because the miracle has to be spontaneous, it can't be caused by natural causes, and it has to be a permanent thing where there'd be no relapse.
Okay. Now, one word I heard, and I like to favor myself on the vocabulary, but I'm unfamiliar. The word canonized.
Yes.
What does that actually mean, canonized?
An official declaration by the Pope.
Okay.
In the old days in the church, up until maybe 1000, saints were not formally canonized by the Pope. They were canonized, if you will, by the people, by popular acclaim. But as time wore on and questions arose about who's really a saint and who's just a guy from the neighborhood that we loved, and we're going to have to kind of purify the process and go through a study. And you've probably heard that old phrase, the devil's advocate. We'll have to bring somebody in. Hey, what about those women that Toussaint knew? And all of those sessions that he had with these women that loved him. What were those like? What was his life like? So all of that's been kind of laid out, and so there's an investigation that's done of the person's life and their good works and so that's being done and has been formally presented, this material information about him, by the Archdiocese back in 1990. So Rome's had this for quite a while, and I think we have reason to feel that that miracle that I mentioned earlier is being given serious consideration. Many do feel that the boy will will lead to that miracle, and then he'll need one more.
Right, excellent. Now, I know one thing is as remarkable of a human being he was, and as much as he did, there's not a lot of photographs or still photos, or we have some imagery, and there's a reason for that. But recently, I'll not say recently, but in the last, say, 10 years or so, 15 years, there was some discovery with regard to bones and a comparison to the skeleton. When we talked about that prior to doing the show, I just thought that was remarkable how science was able to recognize this particular fossil or bones and then take them imagery from somewhere else and realize, this is Pierre Toussaint.
True.
Potentially, this is generally 99.9% who he is. Let's talk about that process right there.
Right. The decision was made in 1990, November, to go to Old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Little Italy, in New York, and exhume the remains of Pierre Toussaint. We knew that he had been buried there. We knew he had been buried there with his wife and his adopted niece, Euphemia, and we have pictures of them that are showing here. So after 3 tries, the remains were found. And Pierre was on top, and his wife beneath him, and the little girl beneath her. In the plot, and the skeleton was removed, skeleton number 6.
Is that possibly the plot?
And that is the plot, with a new stone placed on it, but the actual terrain right there in the cemetery. So 99.9% the forensic team said, we have a black man. And the feeling was, this is undoubtedly Toussaint. We don't have a marker clearly indicating it, but the number of black people that would have been buried in the cemetery would have been small. So here is a gentleman of about 6 feet, black male. One of the men in the forensic team knew that there was a photo up in Colombia, and the photo was taken in 1851 by by an ex-president of Colombia, Nathaniel Fishmore. The caption and the photo appeared in a book in the 50s, and the caption read, "Unidentified Black Servant." But people who had been supportive of Toussaint over the years, through the 20th century, felt that was Toussaint in the picture, but couldn't prove it. The photo was then taken. The skull in the photo was developed. And then dimensions from the skull found in Old St. Patrick's were compared, and a perfect match occurred. And the unidentified black servant, we now know to be Pierre Toussaint. And the caption also read that same unidentified black servant may have been the gentleman who lovingly tended the flowers and the lawns of Old St. John's Park in New York, which is now the entrance of the Holland Tunnel.
Right.
And we have a picture of Old St. John's Park, too, so that we now know 2 things. We know that picture is Toussaint, and that's Toussaint in old age, about 2 years before he died.
Right. Now, I know as we were talking, early 1700s, early 1800s, transportation was not what it is today.
Right.
So a lot of people had to do a lot of physical mobility as far as walking.
Right.
And as you said, I know did you say he was one who did a lot of walking to the degree that it caused him some arthritis?
Right.
Elaborate on that.
Right. The forensic team found in his knees evidence of arthritis, that he was hobbled at the end of his life. And we know that he walked his rounds. He had 2 kinds of clients. He had 2 salons, one on West Broadway and one on Canal. But he also had women who were called subscription clients, where he would come to their homes, sometimes once a week, sometimes more than once a week, and do their hair. And so there was intense amount of travel in this work. The other thing is he did so much besides just being a hairdresser. He was a confidant, a family friend. He was a dance master. We have little scraps of paper that were found in his house after his death, where he's written in French, "un chasse," the words for the gavotte, the dance that these young people would be taught. So when he came to New York, he was 16, but a pretty remarkable person with an education and an ability to read and to write, play instruments. Quite an upbringing he had, and we don't really know quite how it all happened. We know where, the plantation, but who did the teaching? How did he? So many remarkable things about him. People who knew him said that not only could he read and write, but he could explain his religion. He could quote huge passages from spiritual writers, French ones, that he obviously read in the plantation, in the library there. So he had access, to the books in the plantation.
Now, looking at his time, I see this may be his daughter.
Yes.
Right? His daughter.
Right.
And,
his niece.
His niece.
And he adopted her.
That he adopted her.
Right.
Now, just thinking about, just the time, and this is maybe
his wife.
His wife.
Right.
Okay. So I'm thinking about the time, the 1700s, 1800s, African-American, black, male, servant, free, slave. I'm sure for him to accomplish some of the things that he accomplished, he had to have some allies that may not have been black or African-American.
Right.
Were there any Europeans in America that, had favor,
yes,
found favor with Pierre Toussaint?
Definitely. What's happening in New York at this time, end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th, is there's a whole influx into New York of French. There are French from the Caribbean who are escaping the revolutionary activity that's going on in the Caribbean, especially in Haiti. But there are also French who have come over from France who are escaping the French Revolution. So these are people, this French colony that is established in New York is in a sense a kind of perfect conduit for him because he speaks French and he is French. So because there's a French colony in New York, it facilitates his hairdressing clientele. I should mention that one of the ways we know a great deal about those people is because Pierre was a saver. And when he died, his executors found 1,100 letters to him, written to him, that he had saved. So we now can go through these letters and find the names of all kinds of people from all over the place, but also, Europe and Paris and different places in France, and so we see that his clientele and his associations are broad and wide, and it's a very exciting time. I mean, lots of work is now being done on what we call the black diaspora.
Right.
But Pierre is not only part of the black diaspora as a slave, he's also part of the French diaspora, and when he comes to New York. Of course, he has to become somewhat of in Rome, do as the Romans. So here he is in New York, do as the New Yorkers. But that's easier said than done because there's a great part of him that's a Frenchman. And of course, the French can be quite elite about their being French. And so there's that part of him that always remained French. Mm-hmm. And once he finds his godmother and relations in Paris that are still alive and write to him, there's that tug, will he go back over? Will he leave New York finally and go to live in Paris? But the decision is, just like someone that knew him well and he knew, Alexander Hamilton, I'm a New Yorker, and I'll stay here. Right.
Now, as an urban historian, I'm sure you detail and research a great deal of individuals. What is it about Pierre Toussaint, that it gives you so much passion?
Well, he is a very important person for today, in that the good that he did was something that he always wanted to cover over. In other words, he's always doing good, but he's definitely not interested in promoting himself. And today we live in a cult of celebrity, where even religious individuals want to sometimes bring themselves forward in a certain way. Mm. And Toussaint's goodness and his charity to people is something he doesn't want people to know about. So that he is, shall I just to get to the bottom line, he's a good Catholic.
Okay.
He is an honest to goodness, good person, and people love him for that. And that is another thing about sainthood. There's something about saints that become models. Amelia Kruger says, "I want to be like you." I mean, that is so. How can you be this way?
Right.
I'm not sure that I can do this, but oh, if I only could.
Right. Now, this gentleman here,
John Adams, president, in 1797, the year that Toussaint arrived. And there's Toussaint's, that's not his house, but that's the site that he lived in for so many years in New York on Reed Street. That building was built in 1860, and Toussaint died in 1853. So it's a more cast iron building in Tribeca, but it is the site.
Okay. So, I'm wondering, very few people are familiar with Pierre Toussaint, and, the fact that here, the Catholic Church is looking to canonize this individual, make him a saint.
Right.
I mean, I think that's huge, you know. Why do you think his legacy and his whole nature and the person of this human being has kind of been overlooked?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, on the one hand, you might say that people who do good sometimes are less saleable, marketable than people.
Unfortunately.
Right. There's a somewhat of a perhaps more political issue here too that we could at least
touch upon.
Exactly. There may be a reason to feel that historians, especially in the 20th century, the early 20th century, and even up until our own time, find blacks who protest, who are sometimes called protest lions, Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, even Malcolm X. We moderns see that type of activity as a kind of quintessentially black. This is the way blacks should be, claim their rights as men. And so the protest mode seems to maybe eliminate individuals who might not have taken that course. So there may be, that may be a reason. I know there's some people in New York that wish that Pierre was more vigorously opposing slavery. But as someone said, we can't look back into history and simply ask people, historical figures, to be the beneficiaries of a history that they were yet to live in.
Right.
And the other thing too is we know two things. We have two primary sources on him. We have a memoir written a year after he died, and we have the 1100 letters. And the letters are all in French. And Pierre is French, so his language is to some extent a barrier to many people who might be more might have discovered more about him if they were able to read those letters.
Understandable.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's weird. So I'm just happy, now this young lady here.
This is his mistress, Marie Berard, from a miniature that hangs in the New York Historical Society, as do this is his closest client, Mary Ann Schuyler. Her sister wrote the memoir. This was a artwork done by Gilbert Stewart, and St. John's Park, where Pierre took care of the flowers and the lawns. He's a true New Yorker with all kinds of. He left no list of clients, which is sort of unfortunate. I mean, we have all these letters. We have he kept his manumission, that Marie wrote out, his will, all sorts of things that he kept, but he kept no list of all of these famous people that he visited. If we had the list, we'd have an even richer portrait of his contacts. But his two closest friends, Kitty Kruger, friend of Jefferson's daughters, and Mary Ann Schuyler, of the Schuyler family, General Schuyler, what they call the Dutch aristocracy in New York. Before the Vanderbilts, before the Astors, we had the Schuylers and the Krugers. So he was connected with what you would call the highest social plateau. But yet, his charitable works extended throughout. In his letters, we have people in prison writing to him. He does prison ministry. He does ministry where he takes people in. Young kids are brought into his house with his wife and probably apprenticed to be hairdressers themselves. Yellow fever, he treats. He's a nurse. He goes over the barricades down on Maiden Lane to treat yellow fever victims. It's just, the Roman Catholic Orphanage on Prince Street, he becomes the principal fundraiser. Just a ton of things.
It's a ton of things, and it is. And what's even much more grand and spectacular to me is the time, the era. You know, you can understand someone being able to make those accomplishments and strides in 2000 or even the 90s, but we're talking about the 1700s,
right.
You know, the mid-1800s, so that's a remarkable thing. I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to learn more about Pierre Toussaint. I'm happy to have the opportunity to have someone who is knowledgeable about it that can bring and share that information with the Urban Wall Street Project. So, Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate you and thank you for being here to be a part of the project. My audience, my family at home, we are remarkable people. There's a lot of remarkable people in our history that have been overlooked, that have been overshadowed or forgotten. Pierre Toussaint, fortunately, is one who has not been completely, and as time is moving on, I think his legacy and his accomplishments are being recognized even greater with the assistance of individuals like James Sullivan and Haitian Memorial Foundation. So I want you to do some research, as we come up on Black History Month, and find out a little bit more Pierre Toussaint, this amazing New Yorker, and find out how you can be a living saint, if you will. You've been watching the Urban Wall Street Project. As I always say, be mindful, be prosperous, stay positive, keep your head up. Check out the Young Producers program at youngproducers.tv. Of course, watch Urban Wall Street Project online. If you miss it, you can see this at urbanwallstreet.tv. Until the next time, family, peace.